Sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
So Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Everyone knows the name Jeffrey Epstein, the private jets, the powerful friends, the shocking arrest. But at the center of his world was something far more unsettling. A small private island in the Caribbean called Little St. James. From above, it looks like paradise. Crystal clear water, perfect beaches, total privacy, the kind of place meant to escape the world. But here's what doesn't add up. If everything that happened there has already been exposed, why did the island remain so tightly controlled even after Epstein's arrest? Why were certain buildings left sealed? Why were there reports of hidden cameras, restricted areas, and a strange temple-like structure sitting at the highest point, with no clear purpose? Workers were told not to ask questions. Visitors arrived quietly, and whatever happened there stayed there. And even after Epstein was gone, investigators didn't immediately reveal everything they found. No complete public explanation. No full picture, which raises the question no one can fully answer. Was Little St. James completely uncovered? Or are there still secrets buried behind its locked doors? To understand why Little St. James became one of the most disturbing places on Earth, you have to rewind to a time before the headlines, before the investigations, before anyone outside Epstein's circle even knew its name. Back in 1997, the island was nothing more than a quiet, expensive piece of Caribbean real estate owned by venture capitalist Arch Cummin. It was listed for $10.5 million, marketed like any other private island. A year later, in April 1998, a company called LSJL purchased it for $7.95 million. The sole member of that company was Jeffrey Epstein. At the time, the purchase barely raised attention. Wealthy men buying private islands wasn't unusual. But what Epstein did next slowly transformed Little St. James into something far more controlled and far more secretive than anyone realized. By 2005, Epstein had installed dedicated power lines and fiber optic cables running directly from nearby St. Thomas. This wasn't just about convenience. It eliminated the need for generators and gave the island its own secure, high-capacity communication infrastructure. Whatever happened there could remain completely independent from the outside world. 2 years later, in 2007, Epstein began major renovations. The compound nearly doubled in size. New buildings appeared. Guest houses, staff quarters, and private structures expanded across the landscape. By 2008, the island employed around 70 full-time staff members, pilots, chefs, maintenance workers, security personnel. But everyone was given the same instruction. Discretion and confidentiality were absolute. No questions. No outside discussions. What happened on the island stayed on the island. And during this same period, something much darker was happening behind closed doors. Between 2000 and 2019, multiple victims later testified that they were trafficked to Little St. James. According to the U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General's lawsuit, some victims were as young as 11 years old. Over time, the island began gaining disturbing nicknames among locals and insiders. People called it Isle of Babes. Others called it Pedophile Island, Orgy Island, names that reflected rumors most people didn't want to believe were true. Yet Epstein continued expanding his presence. In 2016, he purchased the neighboring island, Great St. James, for $17.5 million, further increasing his isolation and control. Around the same time, government officials received complaints about land clearing and construction happening without proper permits. But Epstein's operations continued largely uninterrupted. Everything changed in July 2019. Federal investigators raided Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, discovering safes filled with CDs, hard drives, and sensitive materials. Days later, Epstein was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges. The world finally began paying attention. Then, on August 10, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. His death was ruled a suicide, but it only intensified public suspicion. Just 3 days later, on August 13, the FBI raided Little St. James itself, seizing computers and evidence directly from the island. By that point, the property was valued at nearly $64 million. But the man who controlled it was gone. In the years that followed, the island entered a strange new phase. In 2020, an urban explorer secretly entered the island and filmed abandoned buildings, furniture left behind, and structures frozen exactly as Epstein had left them. That same year, the U.S. Virgin Islands reached a $105 million settlement with Epstein's estate. In 2021, Epstein's longtime associate Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of sex trafficking and sentenced to 20 years in prison, confirming what many had suspected for years. In 2022, both Little St. James and Great St. James were listed for sale at $125 million. A year later, in May 2023, billionaire investor Stephen Dekoff purchased both islands for $60 million, announcing plans to turn them into a luxury resort. But progress stalled. No major construction began. The island remained quiet. Then, new developments began to reopen old wounds. In April 2025, Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent accusers, died by suicide at age 41. Months later, her memoir was published, detailing her experiences and the abuse she said took place on the island. In November 2025, Congress passed the Epstein-Files Transparency Act with overwhelming support, forcing the release of previously hidden evidence. By early 2026, millions of pages of documents, hundreds of thousands of images, and thousands of videos had been released or reviewed. And yet, even with all that information, many questions remained unanswered. Because Little St. James was never just a private island. It was a controlled environment, built slowly, expanded deliberately, and protected carefully for over 2 decades. And even today, with new owners, new investigations, and years of global scrutiny, its full story still feels incomplete. Now let's zoom in. Because understanding the timeline is one thing, understanding the island itself is something else entirely. Little St. James sits just 2 miles southeast of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. 2 miles. Close enough to reach quickly, but far enough to exist in complete isolation. The island spans roughly 70 to 78 acres, according to property records, and Epstein reportedly gave it his own nickname, Little St. Jeff's. His island, his territory, his controlled world. From a distance it looked peaceful, but up close it was something very different. At its peak, Little St. James wasn't just a private retreat. It was a fully self-sustaining compound. The main residence was designed by Edward Tuttle, the architect behind Aman Resorts, one of the most exclusive luxury brands in the world. The island included 4 guest villas, 2 swimming pools, a helipad, a private dock, and even its own gas station. There was also a gym, movie theater, Japanese bathhouse, library, and 3 private beaches. According to infrastructure records, Epstein installed dedicated power lines and fiber optic cables connected directly to the mainland. The short answer? Independence. The real answer? Control. Because when you combine private power, private internet, and private transportation, you create a place where nothing needs to leave and nothing needs to be seen. But nothing raised more questions than one specific structure known as the Temple. A blue and white striped building positioned at the island's edge, originally topped with a golden dome and statues. Permit records claimed it was supposed to be a music pavilion, but investigators later confirmed the final structure didn't match the approved plans. Urban explorer Andy Bracco said he saw a staircase descending downward inside, and drone footage showed beds and equipment within the building. Its true purpose was never officially explained. Then in December 2025, Newly released investigative photos revealed even more. A room containing what appeared to be a dental chair, a chalkboard with words like power, deception, truth, and politics written across it, security monitors, phones with redacted names, and a photograph of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell standing with Pope John Paul II. Now pause. Deep breath. Because when you step back and look at everything together, it becomes clear this wasn't just a luxury island. It was a controlled environment built for privacy, secrecy, and complete isolation. And that leaves one question: why? But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because Little St. James wasn't just isolated. According to victims and investigators, it was watching. Constantly. Maria Farmer, one of Epstein's earliest accusers, said in a televised interview that Epstein personally showed her the surveillance system. She described old television monitors stacked together, each displaying live camera feeds from different parts of the island. And what she saw was disturbing. Toilets, beds, private rooms. Everywhere she looked, there was a camera. She also described a hidden door behind a limestone wall that led to what she called a media room, where the monitoring took place. Another victim, Jennifer Arauz, stated in her lawsuit that when she walked through the front door, cameras were already pointed in every direction, and on nearby monitors, she could actually see herself being recorded in real time. Now pause. Ask yourself why someone would need that level of surveillance inside a private residence. The short answer? Security. The real answer? Control. But here's the thing. When investigators began raiding Epstein's properties, they didn't just find cameras. They found gaps. During the 2005 Palm Beach raid, police discovered computer equipment, monitors, and disconnected surveillance cameras. But according to official reports, key recording devices and video footage were missing. Gone. Then in 2019, when federal agents raided Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, they found safes filled with CDs and hard drives. According to FBI testimony during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, some of those hard drives already had tamper-proof evidence tape on them before agents even secured the scene, raising serious questions about who had accessed them first. And in 2025, Attorney General Pam Bondi publicly stated that investigators were aware of tens of thousands of videos connected to Epstein involving minors or illegal material. But at the same time, FBI Director Kash Patel dismissed claims that incriminating videos of powerful individuals existed, directly contradicting public speculation. And that contradiction leaves us with a chilling question. If the cameras were everywhere, and the recordings existed, where did the rest of that footage go? On November 18, 2025, Congress overwhelmingly passed the Epstein-Files Transparency Act 427-1, forcing the release of documents tied to Epstein's network. The very next day, President Trump signed it into law. The deadline for the Department of Justice to release the files was set for December 19, 2025, but they missed it, releasing a heavily redacted batch that sparked bipartisan outrage. Reports showed 500 pages completely blacked out, and some files had even disappeared entirely. Finally, on January 30, 2026, the DOJ released over 3 million pages of documents, including 180,000 images and 2,000 videos. The files revealed astonishing new details, emails to Bill Gates, Steve Bannon, Peter Thiel, and even Elon Musk. And here's the part nobody expected. In December 2012, Musk emailed Epstein asking, quote, "What day night will be the wildest party on your island?" Musk later denied attending, saying in 2025, Epstein tried to get me to go to his island and I refused. But here's the thing. The revelations weren't just shocking, they were also disastrous for victim privacy. Among the files were unredacted nude images of survivors and documents exposing their names. Hundreds of thousands of emails and victim interviews remain missing, leaving glaring gaps in the public record. Over 200 attorneys representing survivors demanded the DOJ site be taken down, calling it the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history. And while the draft indictment from 2007 finally surfaced, it was a stark reminder of what could have happened and didn't. The documents painted a world of power, secrecy, and abuse far larger than previously documented, with emails and images exposing both the reach of Epstein's network and the shocking failure to protect survivors. So, what happens to the island now? With all this evidence, the privacy violations, and the unanswered questions, the future of Little St. James remains uncertain and disturbing. The files may have lifted part of the veil, but they also showed how much is still hidden, how much control Epstein wielded, and how little the world may ever truly know about what happened on that isolated island. In May 2023, billionaire Stephen Dekoff purchased both Little St. James and Great St. James for $60 million, less than half the original asking price. He announced plans to turn the islands into a 25-room luxury resort, promising a world-class destination benefiting its natural grace and beauty. Well, it's 2026 now, and the resort is still nowhere near opening. Let's be fair, some renovation has taken place. The blue and white striped temple, the building that sparked so many questions, has been painted white, and an outdoor patio with a fire pit has been added. But here's the thing, the same buildings where abuse occurred are being repurposed, not demolished. One critic summed it up perfectly: you can't just paint over what happened there. Imagine walking past those walls, knowing their history. Would you vacation there? Now pause. Deep breath. Because the contrast is staggering. On one hand, there's a vision of luxury, leisure, and tropical beauty. On the other, there's the undeniable memory of trauma and exploitation. Survivors and critics alike ask the hard question: should an island with such a dark past ever become a vacation destination? And as the temple and other buildings are remodeled rather than torn down, that question becomes harder to ignore. And that's just the beginning of the ethical debate surrounding Little St. James. So picture yourself looking at satellite images, before and after photos, and headlines announcing the resort. What's truly gone, and what's still hidden on Little St. James? The island's story isn't just about wealth and isolation. It's about secrecy, control, and the legacies of what happened there. The short answer? Renovation. The real answer? Much more complicated. So, what's still hidden on Little St. James? Literally, half of the 6 million pages the DOJ claims to have remained unreleased. Victim statements, prosecution memos, hundreds of thousands of emails. And if the surveillance footage exists, it's never been seen. Virginia Jufra asked the question that haunts us all. Where are those videotapes the FBI confiscated from Epstein's houses? And why haven't they led to the prosecution of any more abusers? Survivors want transparency and accountability, but every release exposes their names and images, re-traumatizing them. Meanwhile, the island moves forward. The temple's blue and white stripes are gone. A fire pit now sits where abuse occurred, and the resort plan is stalled. Contradictions remain at the top. Bondi claims tens of thousands of videos exist, while Patel dismisses any incriminating material involving powerful people. 6 years later, the truth is still murky. A 2026 CNN poll shows nearly 2/3 of Americans believe the government is deliberately withholding information. So here's the question for you. What do you think is still hidden? Little St. James isn't a military bunker or secret lab. It's a place built for secrecy, control, and power. And even now, we may never know the full story. But that's the open loop. Accountability, justice, and truth are unfinished here. Share your thoughts. What do you believe remains hidden, and why?